backpack that I would typically travel with my camel gear is not going to allow me in there. I can't get in there at all. And so having a small bag option is really good. And so sometimes what I'll do is like, well, I don't want to bring a small bag with me. I'll put all my toiletries and other clothes and my socks in there so that it doesn't really take up the room of a full bag. I'm filling it with stuff as it's going in my camera bag. A lot of us are going to have a camera and multiple lenses and so forth, but really have a small portable system beyond your travel system thought of. And so if you normally take a backpack, what can you do with 1 or 2 lenses? And have something ready so that if you are taking a long walk or you're restricted in some manner, what's your full system? What's your mini system that you can use? We tend to have a lot of valuable stuff with us, and so we need to be a little conscious about security. So first thing are these little travel safety locks, and these are the ones that are approved by the TSA, and they're the ones that you can put on your checked luggage or any other luggage. And as I say, it prevents lazy thieves. You know, if somebody really wants to get through this, this is not the biggest lock in the world. But think about it. If you're just a dumb thug looking to steal something, are you going to go for the bag with a lock or without a lock? Pretty obvious there, and so it's just another way to help you out a little bit. There's a lot of different ways of carrying your money around your neck and the waist, and frankly, I've never been happy with those. They just make me feel uncomfortable, and what I found is that what I like to do is to only carry the absolute minimum of what I need. I'm not carrying my library card, there's no Costco card, none of those I'm taking with me to Africa. I'm just going to put all my money in the smallest possible space so that I have as many different options as to where I put it, probably into a zippered pocket. Obviously, you're probably going to need your passport if you're traveling internationally. I carry a driver's license as backup. Don't try to copy this and use this. I've changed and photoshopped all the information on my driver's license. I have found that it is very nice to carry extra 2x2 photos of yourself. Why might you need this? Well, I think you need it potentially in adventurous and interesting locations. I needed it in Ethiopia because we needed a visa, and we suddenly found out on the spot we needed 2x2 photos, and getting them taken was really, really difficult. When I was in Mongolia, I asked my tour guide about getting special access, press credentials to go to an event. And they says, do you have a 2x2 photo? Yes, I do. And so that helps those sorts of things along. You never know when it might come in handy. And since you're all photographers, this is kind of easy for us people to do that type of thing. So when it comes to gear safety, I know you get these free straps and sometimes you get free bags when you buy gear. I try to avoid any sort of logo. There's a whole philosophy. Some people are living large, look at me, and then I like to go on the other extreme, just kind of blend in with the people and the environment. And so something that photographers have been doing for a long time is they've been covering up the logos and any unnecessary text on their camera with a little bit of either black gaffer tape or black electrical tape. I have had some problems in very hot weather because it then becomes a little bit sticky. So you want to be careful about putting it in place that you are grabbing the camera with your hands. So with your gear, just try to take as little as possible. So if you don't really need something, don't bring it along. Open your bag discreetly. So don't just go, all right, let's show you my 20 lenses and I'm going to go over here and shoot photos. And so, you know, I go in there. I'm not trying to hide it from everybody, but I don't leave it open and try to make a big showcase of it. I have everything documented, the serial numbers, what I'm bringing with every item on a trip. And then I email myself a copy. If I physically lose a copy, I could go to my email and just look in my inbox and see where that is. The first photo you take should be of your business card. If people find your camera, I found a camera one time. I was in Zion National Park, and it was fun, investigative work. I was like, okay, this guy is into canyoneering. I think he lives in Montana, but I have no idea who he is. And I gave the camera back to the park rangers. I don't know if it ever got back to him, but I know if I'd had a business card on there, I would know instantly who it is and how to get a hold of that person. Keep your bag close to you, especially if you're traveling alone. A lot of valuable stuff. It seems obvious, but there are some people who just kind of leave it off on a distance. When you're at a restaurant, you kind of get involved in a lot of different things. I tend to put the bag right between my feet and then squeeze my feet just a little bit. So if anybody had to move my bag, I am physically going to move. Once again, I think this is something that women tend to be better at than men because they're used to carrying purses around, and you can't just hang things over the back of the chair where you're leaning forward because that can just get lifted off. And so wrapping the strap around your feet or just keeping touch with the bag is going to keep it in close contact. Don't keep all your money in one spot. You can split that up into several different areas. And if you're traveling with a companion, you can make photocopies of your passport, your driver's license, and just have them carry it, because it's unlikely that's something that's going to happen to both of your separate bags at the same time. And I know a copy of your passport is not the same as your passport, but it's got a lot of information that could help you out in a bad situation. When my gear is in my room, I do not leave it like my luggage exploded and it's a teenager's room. Okay, when I am going to leave my room, usually towards the middle of the day where there's going to be people cleaning the room, I put my computer or any camera gear that I'm not using, I put it in my luggage, I close my luggage, and I lock it. And it's not because I'm afraid that the people cleaning the room are going to steal my stuff. That's highly, highly unlikely in any case. What's much more likely is that they're cleaning your room, they're making the bed, your computer's sitting over here, and somebody happens to be walking down the hall with your door open. And they just see a computer right there. And so somebody who has no association with the hotel at all, maybe not even somebody who's even staying there, just walks by a room and, oh, there's something laying out. And so that's the reason, just be cautious with it. I will leave things out sometimes if I'm just going to dinner and I'm going to be back relatively quickly and there's going to be nobody in the room. All right, we talked about planning, researching both internet and books, packing light, staying healthy, and don't overplan. You want to have some time to be free and relaxed so you can go out there and create great photos. Well, folks, it is time for the next stage of our journey, and we're going to be talking about gear and technique. I know there's lots of questions on this. We're going to try to get through this as quick as we can, but there is a lot of information in this section for sure. We're first going to be focusing on gear, cameras, lenses, and lots of accessories. And definitely one of my favorite quotes here. We used to work at a camera shop, and we'd hear this one every once in a while. Not sure how much the new equipment will help, but there we go. Okay, let's talk about the idea. Once again, weight is the enemy. Take only what you need. Know your gear. This means probably not buying a camera en route to the airport, okay? Bad idea in most cases. And get an inventory of everything you're bringing, all the serial numbers, so you have all that logged down. Now, as we all know when it comes to camera equipment, there's this whole balance of finding the right fit for what you are going to do. And what's right for me is going to be different than what's right for you in most cases, and what's right for your friend is different than for you. And so getting advice on what gear to bring is a very dangerous territory in which to tread. Trust me, I have a lot of people that email me questions and they are impossible to answer, very, very hard to answer. And so the right gear depends on what sort of things. Well, what are you going to shoot? What sort of things? How do you like to travel? What conditions will you be in? Can you change lenses, or is it a dusty desert environment with sand blowing every place? Do you have baggage limits like I had in Africa, where you have small planes and you can't bring a lot of equipment with you? So there's a lot of considerations as to what you bring with you. And I'll just throw this out there. It doesn't matter in so many cases. You could just go with one lens that's totally the wrong lens, and it's just going to change how you see your trip, and it's going to push you in a new direction, which is totally fine. So I am occasionally trying to challenge myself. You know what? I'm going to go without a wide-angle lens. I'm going to concentrate on telephoto for this trip or this day's journey and so forth. And so I know a lot of people, especially who are kind of new into photography, they start seeing how complicated everything is, and they just start getting overwhelmed at how complicated it is. And the fact of the matter is that you can succeed with virtually anything that you have, so long as you have the right attitude about using it. So you should test your gear, know it works. Have you tried the downloading process? Does your memory cards work? Have you tried all them? Are they formatting fine? What sort of backup options you have? Smart protocol for critical items. I love to have backup stuff. Got one pair of socks, in case they lose, get lost, or bail, I have a backup pair of socks. I like having 2 cameras with me. I like having 2 lenses. There are certain things that you just can't have 2 of. You don't get 2 passports. So you really got to be careful about where that passport goes. Most people travel with one battery charger. And so I'm not saying that you need to run out and buy a second battery charger, but you got to be really conscious of where that battery charger is at all times. Because if that fails and you're in a place where you can't buy a battery charger, you've got 1, 2, 3 days left and you're out of photos. And so there's a few items that you have that are absolutely critical, and that's just the way things are. And you just need to be very, very careful about where they get packed and how you think about those. So if you are looking to buy a new camera, if you're trying to choose a camera, the first thing that I really think about is the image sensor size, because that's going to determine the size of your lenses and the system that it's a part of. The fact of the matter is, all of these can make for great travel photography tools. It's a matter of that balance that's right for you and what you are wanting to do. Most people are out there taking pictures with their phones, and they are perfectly satisfied with the shots that they're getting from their phones, which is great. It's lightweight, it's small, and it's multi-purpose, which is a perfect travel type item. The larger the sensor you go, the better it's going to do in overall image quality and low light ability. When you get up to the full frame over there on the far left, you're going to get into a system that's been around for 70 plus years now. So it's a really fleshed out system. So there's lots of lenses and accessories. And so there's different sweet spots for different people. I'm not going to be able to tell you which one's best for you because I don't know your situation. I will say that if you were trying to compete against the top professional photographers out there, they are generally using a full frame camera. Most enthusiastic amateurs, people who like to do this on the weekend, are probably shooting with an APS-C type camera. There's a very big following with the 4/3 system. And that's kind of the cutoff where you get interchangeable lenses, which is where you get into a lot of the fun and what I really like about photography. The point and shoot cameras will use smaller sensors, but they can be very valuable if you're trying to go lightweight or you want a lightweight compact backup camera. Most people who are getting into photography like options of lenses. And this is where you're going to find those options between full frame, the APS-C, and the 4/3 system. And once again, it just comes down to this balance point of what you want. And when I travel, be honest with you, I usually travel with a full frame camera. Usually. And that's because I work professionally in this world and I am trying to take the highest quality photos, and I'm often trying to showcase what full frame images do. But to be honest with you, if it was just me, if I just decided I'm going to retire and I just want to go out and travel, I probably wouldn't take a full frame camera. It just gets so big because of all the lenses. I would probably choose one of the APS-C options. And so if I had to pick what's the best travel camera, as I say, I don't know. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to be in that APS-C range just because the equipment comes down a little bit in size and you can still do so much with that category. So we have this kind of never-ending stream of different levels of photography. And as I say, you can use your phone and take very good quality photos. They just keep getting better every year with the phone. But you're limited with your angle of view and how much manual control and how much sophistication you can do with it. One of the things I love about the phone is that it's a great backup camera. In case your main camera goes down, at least you still have something to take pictures with. It can be great for behind the scenes. It's easy for shooting video. For people who are really wanting to get into travel photography, my guess is that you're probably wanting a little bit more out of the device. And so then we take the next step up the range. The point and shoot camera, I'm going to give you some recommendations of favorite ones after this section, but for right now, point and shoot camera is really nice for those situations when you want to go really lightweight. This is a great go to dinner, going on a hiking trip type camera. You don't have as many controls as you do with the larger ones, but everything's small and compact in there. For people going on safari, dealing with wildlife, or needing a telephoto, there are these super zoom bridge cameras that have some ridiculous zoom lenses on them. They're not quite as good as a true telephoto lens on a larger scale camera, but they do a really good job in the bang for pound that you are getting with these things. And so still not quite what I would recommend for most people because you can't change the lens. And there's so many options that open up when you get to this next level. And so if you really want something compact, there's a whole group of cameras that I call subcompact mirrorless cameras. And this is often the Micro Four Thirds system. They use a relatively small, medium-sized sensor in them, but you have tons of different lenses because Olympus and Panasonic share a lens mount here. And so I think this is a sweet spot for a lot of people who want to stay pretty small in size and still get real camera control with shutter speeds, apertures, filters, and all those sorts of things. Moving more up to a mid-size compact here is one of my favorite places because these are typically just a little bit bigger, they have better hand grips, and the controls are a little bit better. The thing about cameras is that, yes, you can make cameras as small as you want, but our hands have not changed in size. And so dials and buttons need to be a certain size for them to be easy to use with. And this is about the smallest size that most serious photographers like to use because the buttons are all very easy to work with on there. This is probably one of the most common types of cameras that people are using for travel photography, and that's because Canon and Nikon, the two biggest manufacturers, this is where they make most of their affordable cameras and their crop frame sensors. And so this is good just because you're dealing with the large crowds and there's an abundance of options out there at a very good value. We're starting to see more and more mirrorless cameras on the market. And so full frame mirrorless is kind of the latest thing that is really starting to blossom right now. And going back to the issue of mirrorless versus DSLR, the mirrorless cameras are nice because they have some very nice features. The camera body does end up being a tad bit on the smaller side, but don't get a mirrorless camera if you think you're reducing your camera package. All right? The entire package is going to be virtually identical in size and in weight. It might be 3 ounces less and a 1/4 inch less, and so yes, it's less, but it's just not much less. And so I like mirrorless because of the features it offers. I like the electronic viewfinder in some cases or other features that it might have. And so they're becoming more and more popular as we will see going forward. The most popular for the serious photographer, let me see if I can go back here. Most popular for the serious photographer is the full frame SLR, which has traditionally been Nikon and Canon, a little bit of Pentax in there as well. And this is because there's a ton of different lenses, and if you were going to go on a professional shoot, this is what you should probably have, or at least what we've had in the past, because there's so many different options on here. It's what I've used predominantly on my travels over the last dozen years or so. But I do look longingly at those cameras that are mirrorless, that are smaller size sensor, that have a smaller size package to it. But if you're trying to accomplish something serious, sometimes you need serious gear. And that's not the end of it. You can go another step and you can go to medium format. And there are a variety of medium format cameras out there that will take even higher quality photos, but there's less options when it comes to lenses and accessories, and the price goes up. All of these cameras take batteries, they don't have a cable that runs into the wall, and you can pick them up in your hands, which means they're good for travel, which is my definition of a good travel camera. Okay, so looking at our range of cameras and some of the characteristics that they have, I was thinking for a moment, is there a bad travel camera? No, it really depends on your needs. And so I think all cameras can be good for travel. Obviously, the phone is going to have lower quality. I know it's getting better and better, but with that smaller size sensor, it just can't compete with the larger size cameras. When it comes to point and shoots, here are 4 of my current favorites currently available on the market, slightly addressing different needs. In general purpose, the Sony RX100, they keep on coming out with the new ones. The latest one is, I guess, the 6. Is a nice general purpose one. For those who like a fixed lens, the Fuji has some traditional controls, which has been very much loved. If you want a large zoom, the Sony RX10 can be really nice. And then for those of you who are going scuba diving or hiking or going to be exposed a little bit more to the weather elements, Olympus is making a great line of tough cameras that are weather resistant that can do very well in harsh environments, you might say. For those of you who do have point and shoots, my key tips on how to use these things is that the focusing can be a little bit slower on these cameras, and they use a half press of the shutter release to pre-focus. And that'll cut down on the timing. So for instance, let's say your friend is going to jump into the pool. What you want to do is you want to press halfway down and focus as they're getting ready to jump, because if you just try to do the whole thing while they're jumping, you'll probably capture a splash with no person. So that way your camera is ready to fire very. The automatic flash, which is usually turned on these things, doesn't understand distance. So when you're taking a picture of the Grand Canyon at nighttime, it's firing the flash, and its flash is not filling the Grand Canyon. And so turn that off unless there's something pretty close up to you. And when you are taking pictures of people that are up close to you, the fill flash can be very helpful for lighting your subject. And keep an eye on the battery charge, because these can run through batteries a little bit more quickly because they're powering the LCD on the back of the camera, which uses a bit more power than a traditional viewfinder. All right, when it comes to compact mirrorless cameras, a few of my favorite ones out there fall into the Micro Four Thirds or the APS-C category here. And lots of different lenses are available with these. My favorite are the ones from Fuji. I like the traditional controls. They're the only company that is fully dedicated to that APS-C system. And so they have just this fantastic collection of lenses. And they are the only manufacturer that is making lenses. If I was hired to be part of a company to make a camera and lenses, I would say we're going to have special travel lenses that emphasize small size. And they have a whole series of compact primes for normal, wide angle, short telephoto. They're not a huge collection, but they're really small, lightweight, relatively fast lenses. And I think that's a lot of great stuff. And I've taken those on professional quality shoots, you might say. The crop frame DSLR is probably the safest place to go. If somebody's new into photography and they're like, I just don't know where I'm going to end up and what I'm doing, this is the safest place because you're part of major camera systems. You can grow into their full frame system. Their lenses are very popular. You can buy and sell them online at various locations. They're available in all the stores. You break your lens in Rome, go into a camera shop, they're going to have these two products in there most likely. If you want to go for the highest quality, you're going for full frame cameras, and there's a lot of them out there. These are some of my favorite models, Canon, Sony, and Nikon. They are building up with new models, and they are just ready to do battle in the future with full frame. But one of the things that I've noticed about full frame in my 30 years of shooting is that it keeps getting bigger. The bag that I bought when I was in college for putting 4 lenses and 2 bodies now fits 2 bodies and 2 lenses. The lenses are getting bigger and everything else, and so it's not necessarily the best choice for people who really want to be portable. But if you do want to get the highest quality, yeah, if you're willing to carry the gear, this stuff will provide you with very, very good image quality with a lot of versatility out there. One of the most important things to me is having a backup option. What happens if something happens to my main camera? And I could lose it, it could be an accident, I could have it stolen. I've never had any of those. And that's probably because I brought a backup camera. That's why I fear not bringing the backup camera with me. Sometimes I will want to shoot with 2 cameras. I went to the camel auction just outside of Cairo, and there's camels kicking up dust, and there's just chaos, and this is happening, that's happening, this happened right next to you, and this is happening way down there. And I wanted to shoot with a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens like 2 seconds after another. And there's been a number of cases where I've wanted to shoot with 2 cameras. I normally don't go strolling down the street with 2 cameras off the shoulder, it's just, a little bit much. But in some special event situations, that can be very, very handy. And sometimes they have a different feature set, which can be very useful. Do you have a compact option? Maybe you're just bringing the point and shoot. So that's your kind of go to dinner, relaxing type camera. So think about what is your backup option. And so there's a lot of different ways to think about things. For instance, Olympus, you could take 2 identical cameras. And I can understand this because everything works the same. The menu is the same, uses the same cards. Everything is exactly the same so that if you need a backup or a second lens on there, everything works exactly the same. Sometimes we'll have a main camera and we'll kind of have a junior camera. Well, it's not quite as good resolution. Maybe I'll use that in a riskier situation, or the older camera is the one I'm going to leave out there doing the time lapse, that, I can be shooting with my main camera. I've traveled with this type of combo, full frame, crop frame. Crop frame has a little bit more advantage in shooting telephoto, sometimes in frame rate as well. So I like that option because I love having 2 different things that do different things. It's like I'm the boss and I have 2 employees that are good at different things. I can task them when they're needed. And so frame rates, what are you going to be shooting? Maybe you need one that has lower resolution, but faster frame rates for something in particular that you're doing. And then another one that we just talked about is kind of having a full-size option and then a compact junior option. And so some of these cameras will be notably different in size, but use all the same lenses. Maybe they don't have as many features, but would sure be nice in a pinch that can save your day, save your vacation. Now, I guess it would be a third option you can have for a camera, and this is one that Kenna has loved to bring, is the instant camera. And this is a way to make an instant connection with somebody, because when you can give them a photo, it's one thing to talk to them, it's another thing to show them a photo on the back of the camera, but when you can give them a photo of themselves, that is something that many people in this world do not get that opportunity very often, especially in some poorer countries where, this photographer came to me and gave me a photo of myself. They'll put it up on the wall with the pictures of their mom. It'll go up there with the best of the photos. And right now, Fuji is killing it on the instant cameras. And so they have the ones out there. They have a couple of different models. These are a couple of the most popular models out there. It is a little bit on the pricey side on a per shot basis, so you're not doing it for everyone, everywhere. But in the right times, in the right places, this can be the icebreaker that will change your trip. So I've said that pretty much every camera can be good for travel photography depending on what you're doing. But if I had to design a travel camera, here are some of the features that I would want to have in there. That way, if you have stabilization, you don't have to carry a tripod with you. Silent mode so that you can be very stealthy in how you shoot. You don't draw a lot of attention to yourself. Wi-Fi remote enables you to set the camera up and see what you have the camera pointed at for some potentially interesting options there. Also for downloading and sending pictures up to the internet can make things easy so you don't need other cables for it. This is kind of an extra, but boy, this has been really nice because I've been to some unusual places and I'm kind of like, we drove for hours and I think we were driving in circles, I don't know. Pull up the GPS log and I can see exactly where I went. And that's just real fun to know exactly where you got those shots. Because you're always trying to come up with solutions, a tilt screen just gives you more options as to where you can place the camera and get the shot exactly framed as you want it. Dual cards, I like being able to back up on site as I shoot it. It's just an extra level of security that I know I got things. We'll talk more about backing up as we go along. But I could very comfortably go on a trip, take no computer, no hard drive, one camera with dual cards, knowing that everything's backing up as I'm going along. I could even take one card out and stash it, every other day or something like that. So that just gives you more options. Raw processing is the ability to take a raw image and turn it into a JPEG. Because generally, if you want to upload a picture to Instagram or Facebook or something like that, you can't upload a raw image. Oftentimes, it's too big for the internet for most email servers to handle. So what you want to be able to do is to be able to take a raw image, process it, and make it into a JPEG in your own camera. About half the cameras will do this right now. Whether you need this feature, well, it depends on how you work, but it allows you to not bring a computer, but still have access to outputting images as you are going along on your trip. USB charging. So one of my cameras has a battery charger or USB charging. I love that. Now, if I was to lose that battery charger, all I have is a simple little cable, and I can charge it from any sort of USB plug-in, which is becoming more and more common all over the place. And that is a nice little backup without having to bring two chargers. And so it's just another option in a way to save yourself in that situation. And so those are things that I would look for. If your camera doesn't have one or two of those things, don't freak out unless those things are really, really important to you. And I'm going to have to cut this short here because I could talk all day for weeks about cameras. And I have a lot more information in my camera buyer's guide, which goes through more features to look for. And as I mentioned before, I do have classes on individual cameras that go into the individual features of them. And so hopefully that kind of gets you the most important tips when it comes to the cameras. Let's look at lenses, one of my favorite aspects of photography. And so, as you probably already know, 50 millimeter is your normal lens, at least for the full frame users. And then we're going to have a collection of wide angle lenses that go from moderately wide to ultra wide. And then, of course, we'll have our telephoto lenses. And when you're traveling, you're going to need a range of lenses in most all cases. For the most part, I tell people 24 to 200 is a good range to have. Traveling, I tend to err a little bit more on the wide side. I really like those ultra wides because oftentimes you're trying to show what a location looks like, and sometimes that requires a really wide lens. The long lens is really only when you know that you can make use of a very long lens. Now, of course, if you have a crop frame camera, you will need slightly different numbers of your lenses. And so your typical Fuji or your crop frame Nikon or Canon, I'm talking about 16 to 135. And I think they even make some 18 to 135. So you could get everything in one lens for the most part. I still would like to get a little bit wider down there to 11 millimeters if possible. Working through these lenses, 50 millimeter lens. This is just a great standard lens because it sees the world as we do with our own eyes as far as perspective. And so it's a very natural, honest, real perspective of the way something looks. And so it's a very faithful way to portray something. So I like the 50 millimeter lens. The most popular lens is probably the 35 millimeter lens because you get a little bit wider angle and you can show a little bit more in any particular photograph. This is a great documentary lens where you're documenting something in particular, but you want to show a little bit of the environment around it. The lens I won't leave home without is the 24 millimeter lens. I love it because it's wide, but not overly wide, so it doesn't really stretch the horizon and do funny things in the corners. And so when you are trying to show a location, if you said, John, I really want to see a location, I'd probably bring a 24 if I didn't know anything more about it. It's great for all types of photography, very good for landscape photography because you turn it vertical and now you can have subjects in the foreground as well as the background. But because you encounter a lot of different environments, this is where that ultra wide comes in. A rail car trying to show what it looks like in its entirety, it's not a big space and there's not a lot of space to back up when you're in a rail car. Pointing up, being able to see as far down on these pillars helps to be able to make this image come out a little bit better. So having that ultra wide can be very handy. Going into the telephotos. The short telephoto is an absolute necessity when they won't allow you any closer. There is literally a line in Athens that you are not allowed to stand in front of when the guards are crossing here. And so having that telephoto lens allows you to get rid of the junk on the side and hone in on your subject. These lenses are mostly known as portrait lenses. And so if you want to do people photos, you want a short telephoto around 100 millimeters for the full length, for the full frame models. I also like to make sure that I go out with a 200 millimeter lens in most cases. And that's because I like details. And details help tell a story. They don't tell the whole story, but they help tell a part of the story. And so when you want to get in and just show something really clearly that's smaller, that 200 millimeter lens does the job. You can shoot portraits with it as well, and you can get that shallower depth of field, that bokeh, get the eyes in focus, and that background goes nice and blurry. When you start employing the 400, I'm often thinking about going on safari. And so if you go on safari, you want to probably have at least a 400 millimeter lens because those animals, they're wild and they don't necessarily come right up to you. And so a 400 is great for that, but it's good for a variety of other types of purposes that has a compression effect in the way that you shoot with it. And so these sand dunes are pretty far apart, but by my point of view and angle of view, they all look very close together. And so there are certain types of patterns that you can create with a lens that goes up to 400. Inevitably, most people are going to ask the question, well, John, what's better? Should I take a zoom or should I take a prime lens? Depends on what you're doing, of course. I think in general, it's best to start with zoom lenses because they cover a lot of bases very easily. They're simple and they're easy to use. As you get better and more understanding of what you are looking in photography is when you can start instituting the primes. On one of the tours that Kenna and I led to Cuba, I decided to challenge myself and not take any zooms at all. I had specific primes. And what that changed for me is I missed a lot of quick shots, like, oh, this is happening right now, and I missed those. But I gave that up, and when something was good, I had a really good lens for it that gave me a shallow depth of field, or I could work with under low lights. And so in the situations that I could think a little bit more about, it did a good job. It wasn't necessarily better or worse, it was just a different way of working. Ideally, I'm usually taking a mix. A few zooms to cover the basics, a prime or two to address a very particular need. For a lot of people starting out in travel photography, the standard kit, as it's been for the last, 10 or 15 years now, is usually with a cropped frame camera like a Canon or a Nikon, and it comes with an 18 to 55 lens that a lot of photographers, and maybe even myself if we check the tapes, will call as a junk lens, a throwaway lens. The fact of the matter is that it's lightweight. Optically speaking, it's decent in quality. Doesn't have a lot of fancy features on it, not a lot of great durability, not weather sealed, but for travel photography, it's actually just fine. You could do totally professional. You could shoot the cover of National Geographic with that lens, provided you have the right subject and you shoot it in the right manner. That's not what's going to be holding you back. So that's a good general purpose lens, but then getting something longer for those subjects that are a little bit further away, a little bit smaller in size, this is a good setup. This was essentially the setup that I took to the Soviet Union. All right, and I survived. And it wasn't the lenses that held me back, it was something up here that was holding me back. And so this is a fine starting point, but photographers are going to want to get a little bit more out of it. Typically what happens is people, they get tired of changing lenses, and so they are drawn to the super zoom. And this can save you from changing lenses. So you can get wide angle to very good telephoto all in one lens. I think this has some downsides that are kind of serious. Number one, it is a slower aperture. That's the 3.5 to 5.6 number. And it's not going to be good in certain situations. It's pretty good for everything, but it's not very good for some very important situations. And I think a good way to save this whole situation is to bring along one more fast prime lens. That way you have an option. Number one, if your lens fails, you have a backup option. Number two, if it's a low light situation, you have a fast lens that you can go with. Number three, this is a relatively big zoom lens, and you're going to carry that everywhere you take your camera. When you go out to dinner and you just want to take a few fun photos of the flamingo dancers or something like that, that's when you put on the normal fast lens. Going out to dinner, it's lighter weight, it's better in low light. And so I think this is a good combination. And if you say, well, John, I don't want two lenses, I don't want to change back and forth. You're not changing that much. You're using the zoom lens probably 80, 90% of the time. It's just that this one lens comes in and saves the day and gives you some good options. So I think that's actually a pretty good setup there. Another setup that I've used in the past that I think is quite nice, it's got a few gaps. But it's okay, you can work around little gaps. I get my ultra wide all the way down to 16 with a full frame sensor. I need my telephoto that gets me out to 200, that's going to cover the range. Now I do have a gap now between 35 and 70, and that's where I'll throw in a normal lens. 51.8, 51.4, and I got three distinct lenses. And I know specifically at any given moment in time which lens I'm likely to need. There's no guessing, well, I might be able to do it with this one or that one. No, it's a very clear choice. And it's just three lenses, so it's not too much. And so I think that has worked very well for me. Once again, it all depends on what you are trying to do, what's best for you. I will hammer home one point, and that I really do like the nifty 50 lens as it is known. So with full frame, it is a 50 millimeter, but crop frame, it's going to be 35, or with the 4/3, it'll be a 25 millimeter lens. And this has a lot of benefits. It's that small size, it lets in a lot of light, it has a very natural perspective, and so it's showing you the world the way it very much looks in the real world. You can shoot in low light with really shallow depth of field. It's just extremely good, I think, for documenting a scene. And so it's a very natural lens to use. And so if you don't have one of these, you can pick up basic 50s or the equivalent for not much money. Many of them run between $125 and $250. So it's not a lot of money to spend, and it's got a lot of benefits. And so I think it's a big bang for the buck. All right, had to sum up some of my concepts here. I think at least 24 to 200 for most everyone. See if you have some sort of compact lens option when you want to reduce the weight. I do like to use UV filters for protection. Talk more about those coming up. And it's ideally best if you are taking bodies and lenses that you separate them when you move them. If you have the lens attached to the body and your bag falls off of the shelf or something like that, it's possible that you'll damage 2 items rather than 1. And there's more things that can happen, so it's better just to have individual compartments in your bag for those. And do try to use the rear caps. I don't use front caps very much, but rear caps are really important. That's where a lot of the electronics are, and there's more exposed lenses and mechanical connections on the backside, so make sure you always use those. Thinking about the lens aperture, how much light the lens lets in. When we look at this in regards to the maximum aperture of the choices that are available, most of the kind of consumer stuff out there is in this 3.5 to 5.6 range, which is fine. It's going to work out in most cases. There are some lenses that are a little bit slower that go down to 6.3. These are not going to be real good if you are shooting fast action. So if you're doing something that you know you need with action, you're probably going to want to get something faster than that 6.3. There's some variables in there, but that's just a general thing. Probably my favorite lenses are zoom lenses at f4. It just seems to be the right balance. It's a little bit faster than the others. It's a constant aperture, so whatever focal length I set, I can keep constant shutter speeds, apertures, ISO settings, and I don't have to worry about changing things on it. So that's my favorite for general photography. If I'm being hired professionally to do something, if I'm working with people and action, the 2.8 lenses are nice. They're bigger, but they're going to allow me to shoot just 1 stop lower in the ISO or 1 stop faster in shutter speeds. And so I prefer not to travel with the 2.8s just because they're so big and heavy and they're not necessary for most things. But professionally speaking, that's what most pros use. If you want to go faster, you're going to need to get into the prime lenses, and those fixed primes down at 1.8 are usually fantastic when it comes to price and weight. It's pretty rare that you need a lens that goes down to 1.4. It's sometimes nice as a bonus lens that, okay, well, I do have this one other lens that I can go to. And so that's some of my thoughts when it comes to choosing different lenses on there. And like cameras, I could go on and on and on about lenses, and I don't need to do it now because I've already done it 3 different times here. So I do have a whole class on choosing the right lens. It's kind of a general basic lens class for everyone. And then I have 2 more specific classes on Canon and Nikon lenses where we take a deep, deep, deep dive into all the technology, all the acronyms that these lenses have, and more examples of how to use them in different areas. And so if you love lenses like I love lenses, you'll love these classes. All right, let's talk about some of those other gear accessories. And yeah, this is for travel photography. These are very useful for regular photography, but I find it particularly useful for travel as well. So let's talk about tripods. I know that's kind of an evil word to a lot of people, but I do like to travel with a tripod in many cases because it allows me versatility in what I get photos of. There's a lot of things that you can shoot handheld photos of. But if you want to do certain types of photography, either low light work or great depth of field, it's going to require a tripod of some sort.
Hey, how do you deal with working in like a desert setting or a place where your lens can get like dirty or like covered in dust or something you don't want in there?
Well, if you're in a dusty environment, I've seen people online, because I love going into forums and look at things like, I would never change lenses. I bring one body, one lens, and another body, another lens, and I never switch. And I was like, wow, I was just in Africa and I switched lenses like 100 times in the day. You just be careful about the times and the places that you are doing it. In the worst case, I was in the Sahara Desert and the wind was just, sand everywhere. I went back to the vehicle that we were traveling in, closed the doors, switched the lenses, and then went back out and shot. In some cases, it's just turning your back to the wind. I've been working maybe more with DSLRs than with mirrorless, although I work with both. And the DSLRs do have an advantage because they have a mirror and they have the shutter curtain closed in front of it, so they're a little bit more protective of it. But I do not fear changing lenses in bad environments because I would rather have the right lens and capture the moment and clone out a couple of dust specks later on than not get the shot. I think that's the better choice for me.
We did have a question come in from online that was from Photomaker, and Photomaker said, my phone battery drains a ton. How do you keep your phone charged when you're out and about all day while traveling or camping or what have you? So do you always have A little something extra?
Well, we are going to be getting to the charging section coming up, and I do have certain philosophies on charging. I have noticed when I'm traveling, I don't use the phone a lot because I have my cameras right there, but I have noticed a lot of people who use phones a lot are hooked up to the external batteries, and there's a number of different external batteries that they have because they can't get through a single day on a single charge, and so there's a number of those that are available. And I don't have any recommendations off the top of my head, but I do know they're out there because you're not the first person to encounter this.
Absolutely, especially with mobile filmmaking and those additional things that take up a lot of memory. Any other questions in the studio? Yeah, back row.
Yeah, I just recently started using an intervalometer with my photography, and it's opened up a whole new door of possibilities for shots I can get. Are there any interesting uses that you've found for intervalometers that might not be obvious to the beginning travel photographer?
Ooh, yeah, intervalometry can be a lot of fun. And anytime you find something moving, I don't have it in this class here, but I ran across in Mongolia a river starting. It was a dry riverbed and water was starting to flow through it. And so that was the perfect instance of using an intervalometer. We were able to go down to where it was coming and show it filling up the river. Not that that's a common occurrence that you gave, but you just need to open your mindset to anything that moves, clouds, people, cars. Anything that moves is a potential for doing it. But finding a good location where you can sit and watch your camera for a period of time. And so maybe choosing the restaurant that has the slightly more expensive menu, but has a rooftop view that you can attach your camera to the railing and shoot an entire time lapse while you're eating dinner makes that slightly more expensive dinner worthwhile.
I think we're good to go, John.
Okay, so we were talking about tripods, and the first thing we want to talk about is trying to avoid using the tripod. How much can we get away with not using the tripod? And so one of the things that we're trying to do as photographers is to take nice, sharp photos. And so let's talk about how to maximize the sharpness, kind of from a technical standpoint in the settings of your camera. So we have apertures, shutter speeds, and ISOs. And if I want to take a sharp photo, make sure this is working here. There we go. You're generally going to want to have the lowest numbered ISO that your camera has available. For many cameras, that's 100. Next up, we're going to want to set a shutter speed that we can comfortably handhold the camera. For most people, it's a 60th of a second. I like to go one extra for safety at 125th of a second. The sharpest aperture with a given lens is towards the middle of the lens somewhere, not wide open, not closed down. f8 would be a very sharp place to shoot a photo. Let's take a look at the light meter and see where the light meter says more than 3 stops underexposed. This happens a lot in photography. We need to let in some more light. How can we do this if we don't have, or if we do have a tripod? We'll do that one first. If we have a tripod, I would say, well, the aperture is good, the ISO is good. Let's just move the shutter speed down because the tripod will hold the camera steady, and we can get essentially a technically perfect photo at these settings right here. Now, if we had chosen to come out here without a tripod, we're going to need to make some accommodations. All right, so let's imagine doing this without a tripod. Well, what's the first thing we have to change? Well, we can't shoot at a quarter second anymore. And side note, folks, we're not talking about stabilization right now. Just forget about that, okay? So we need a faster shutter speed. How fast? I would prefer 125th, but I'll take a 60th of a second. Now, how many stops did we lose? Look at this. We were at a quarter second, and we moved up 1, 2, 3, 4. So we lost 4 stops of light that we need to get back using the other mechanisms around us. And so what I would probably do is go over to the aperture and open it up a couple of stops there. Now we're just 2 stops away from a correct exposure. And the only other thing to do, because I've done my work with the shutter speed, I've maxed out the aperture, is I'm going to have to bump the ISO up to 400. Now, this photo at ISO 400 versus 100 and at f4 compared to f8, to be honest with you, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but I always like to try to teach best practices. What will get you the best results, and try to follow that as best you can. And so this is going to be fine. It's going to be a good shot, but when you really dig into the details, the previous shot with a tripod, little different aperture setting, lower ISO, is going to be a higher quality shot. And that's why we want to bring the tripods when and where they are appropriate to bring. So you need to know how low can you go handheld before you start to need to bring out the tripod, and that is the reciprocal rule. And that's the minimum shutter speed you want to be at for hand holding a camera. And it's basically the minimum shutter speed is equal to 1 over the focal length of the lens. And I know this looks like a lot of gobbledygook text if it's the first time you've seen it, but it's pretty simple. What's the lens on your camera? 60? Okay, you need a 60th of a second or faster. So the way this looks with different lenses, your 50mm lens, well, that's pretty close to 60, so we'll just call it 60. You got a big telephoto zoom, 100 to 400? Well, it depends on where the zoom is set, 100, 200, 400, and it's going to be in that 125 to 500 range. Ultra wide lens, you could get down to a 15th of a second. And so you want to be at those shutter speeds or faster for handheld work. Now, technology has changed and we have stabilization built into a lot of different cameras and lenses these days. And so there's a lot of companies that have lens-based stabilization units that do an extremely good job of stabilizing the camera for a few stops of light. There are many cameras that now have stabilization built in on the sensor. This is convenient because you get it with all your lenses. The ones on the lenses tend to be a little bit better, not that much better, but a little bit better on a per case basis. And so having something that you can work with is definitely a benefit. If you're in a situation where you're shooting handheld with a 50mm lens at a quarter of a second, it's not going to work out. We're not steady enough to hold that picture in that case. And so you really need to be up around a 60th of a second if you want to get a sharp photo. Now, if you have stabilization that can help you out 1, 2, 3 stops, 4 stops lower, you can shoot this with stabilization at a quarter of a second, and the lens or the camera stabilization will compensate for your movement, and you can shoot in this situation without a tripod. And so stabilization is definitely a big help for the traveling photographer. One quick note is that you are supposed to turn off the stabilization when you put it on a tripod. And so just keep that as a note. Let's talk about tripods real quick. The bane of my existence is cheap tripods. Oh, I hate cheap tripods. You know, the really cheap one that they kind of push on you at the camera store at the last minute. And that's because they're either unstable, they're too small, they have these braces where they're inflexible and you can't get them low to the ground. And so I just don't know really of a great tripod other than a tabletop tripod that is really low in price. One of my favorite tabletop tripods is this Really Right Stuff one that gets down low, very low to the ground and is very sturdy, could handle a DSLR and a 70 to 200 2.8 lens. They make a really nice head. It's not the cheapest one in the world, but it is definitely a very nice little tripod there. And so I would use this in places where tripods are officially not allowed. Tabletop tripods, they kind of don't care about. I haven't been stopped for using a tabletop tripod. But in New York, at the library here, I was able to put the tripod on one of the railings there to work with. In New York at Grand Central Station, you can't just set up tripods in there. But there's a perfect little platform, little tabletop tripod, and you're totally fine. Nobody cares about it. In Istanbul, Turkey, they have a cistern in there. No tripods allowed. It was like a $600 permit for a tripod. And they were just absolutely insane. Little tabletop tripod, they don't care about that. They just worried about somebody with a big tripod. So on top of those tripods, you need a head. And generally the most all-purpose head is the ball head. There's a lot of other fancy special purpose ones. And there's a lot of great ones out there of different sizes. Everyone's always wondering, what's a good travel tripod? And I'm going to give you 3 recommendations at 3 very different price points. So the Slik Sprint Pro 2 is one of these cheap tripods, but of the cheap ones, it's one of the better ones in my opinion. You want a little better quality, the MePhoto Road Trip will get you definitely a better quality piece of equipment. And if you want the best of everything, the Gitzo 1545T, and these numbers change every few years as they get new models, is my favorite one that I have taken onto many, many different continents and trips because it's just basically the perfect tripod, but it is a little bit expensive. And then I put a Really Right Stuff ball head on the top of it. Now, I wanted to compare how are these different and what are you getting and what's the big difference between these. And so each of them has something kind of unique about it. And so things that are important with a tripod is the weight and the height and how small it is and so forth. And if we look at the inexpensive model here, the big caveat in my mind is that the maximum load, which is basically how well built is this, it's not rated for very much equipment. And when you get it out, it's going to feel a little on the chintzy side. And so it's not something I would want to put a lot of heavy equipment in high winds, for instance. Next up, the road trip model. Very good, well-built model, but the thing is that it's a little bit on the short side for most people. And so you'll see what this means here in just a moment. I'm going to do a demo here. Now, the Gitzo is pretty much exactly what I would design if I could design from scratch a good travel tripod. The big problem there is obviously it's a hugely expensive tripod. Pretty ridiculous spending $1,000 on a tripod unless it's something that you really love and you're going to be using for years and years and years, which is what happens with the tripods that I use. And so I wanted to show you what my favorite tripod looks like, and I've made a quick modification in this. Is I've used the short center post in this. And so I cannot reverse it, which is one of the advantages of these reversible ones, which is nice. It gets smaller. And so when I pack mine up to go to and from the location, I just take this off and pack these separately. And then assembly is pretty quick. But I love the fact that I can hold this with just one hand, and there's a great hand grip. So if I want to walk around, that kind of gets tiring. But right here, it's nice. And so the height of a tripod is really important. These have very nice leg locks, so they set up very quickly. And if somebody had a stopwatch, they can time me. I think I did that in about 10 seconds. And the beauty is that camera is right here, right where I need it. Ideally, I would like it up here in case I might need it, but this is a pretty comfortable place to shoot in. And if you were to set this where a lot of cheap tripods are, because they don't have the right mechanisms, they can't get as tall, they're like this. And so you're like, okay, this looks good. And you know, this is a really comfortable position to keep for about 45 minutes as you're waiting for that sun. Oh, man. Oh, I gotta get back down here. And so having that little extra height makes all the difference in the world. And with the way that I have this set up right now, I can't go any higher than this, but I can get it down really low to the ground, which I think is more beneficial than going up really high. And so in case you're also wondering, I don't know if you can get a close shot of this, but I've put bicycle cork hand tape on this because it makes it more comfortable to hold. It's nice, a little bit of cushion, and it's better in hot weather and in cold weather. So that is cork bicycle hand grip tape. A lot of different brands out there will do that. And so that's what I think is a fantastic tripod. Some people have questions about monopods, because monopods can be helpful as well. And what they are most helpful for is supporting heavy equipment so that it's in a ready-to-use position at any time. It does steady the camera, but not by that much. And so I wanted to do my own test. So I did a handheld test, and then I used a monopod, and I wanted to see if I was getting sharp or blurry photos. And you can see what happens with handheld. You need that 60th of a second with a normal lens, and then you might be able to get something sharp, maybe not. If you use a monopod, it helps out a little bit, but not that much. And if you consider the size of a monopod to the size of a tripod and how many sharp photos you can get with a tripod, you get a bigger bang for the buck with a tripod. And so monopods are fine for heavy equipment. Let's say a bird photographer that has a big heavy lens that they want to keep it in position for a long period of time. Okay, we're going to do kind of the round robin quick stuff of different other accessories. I do like to use UV filters. They protect the front of the lens, and then I don't have to bother about using lens caps. One of the most valuable filters to use for travel photography is the polarizing filter. Now, the polarizing filter is a unique filter because it blocks certain types of polarized light, depending on where it's coming from, depending on what it has struck and how it's coming to the camera. So by putting it on the front of your lens and adjusting it, turning the dial, you will be able to see this effect right in the camera. And it can have a very strong impact in some cases. So as an example, notice the blue sky as we go from minimum polarizing to maximum polarizing. When we go back to minimum, look at the windows on the building, how their reflections change as we go from minimum to maximum. And so there's a lot of different good places that this can be used to reduce those reflections. There's a lot of reflections. This is a video clip, and you can see as I'm rotating the polarizer how much difference it makes in the saturation. It's going to have the greatest effect when the sun is 90 degrees to the right or to the left. Here you can see the sun's coming from the right-hand side, and look at the difference between those two shots. It's amazing as to how much it can change the scene in some, but not all situations. So the quick instructions on how to use a polarizer is locate the sun and turn 90 degrees to where the sun is at. And that's where you're going to get the most impact with that color saturation in the blue skies. And so let's do that real time. We're looking at the sun. Let's turn 90 degrees. Let's add the effect of the polarizer and watch how much it darkens up that sky right there. And so has a nice big impact. And this is useful in many, many different places. So very, very helpful tool. It's going to reduce reflections, increase saturation, get a better blue in the sky. There is a bit of a warning, though, with this, and it's not for ultra-wide lenses. This is an ultra lens, and you can see that when I polarize, it only polarizes the middle portion of the scene. So it just doesn't work well on lenses wider than about 24 millimeters for full-frame gear. It also loses about 2 stops of light, so it's not the best for indoor photography. Another filter that I think is very useful is the graduated neutral density filter, and that's because the brightness of the sky and the land can be very different. And by using a graduated neutral density filter, you can darken the sky so you can see the clouds and the sky more easily, but the ground is the same. And so these filters are usually square. They're graded, it's gradated in from nothing to 2 or 3 stops in density. The official idea is to put an adapter on your lens, and then there's a holder, and then you put the filter in there. A lot of times, most of the time, I'm simply taking the shortcut route and I'm hand holding it in front of the lens so that I can move a little bit more quickly. And in those contrasty scenes where, yeah, the flowers in the foreground look great, but you would like to see the mountain, but it's blown out. If you change the exposure, well, now you can see the mountain, but the flowers are all really dark. And if you want to get the best of both worlds, then we're going to set it all up so that the flowers are natural, bring down our polarizer, and darken that sky. And so this is helpful when you are shooting outdoors and you have a lot of sky in any photograph. You're going to get a little bit more saturation, better color fidelity, and it's just a very, very helpful tool, especially at sunrise and sunset. Look at how much difference it makes with that sky. Takes a blown out sky and starts giving you some colors and texture in it. So these are a couple of tools that I don't leave home without. I will usually take a 2-stop and a 3-stop. I'll use them about equally, and if one breaks, at least I have the other one. So at least I have some built-in backup there, you might say.
Are you interested in cinematography and don't know where to start? I'm Jim Deneau. I've been shooting feature films since 1992, and I'm here to share some of what I've learned with you. In this course, you're going to learn how to work with the director to figure out what the shots are, how to light them and expose them, whether they're interior or exterior, and how to get them looking the way you want no matter what the budget. If you want to learn how to shoot a scene, this is the course for you.
Choosing the best camera bag is, of course, a very personal choice. To start with one camera, yeah, you can just choose a single bag, but most of us usually get into a few accessories. I think a really valuable bag is a small shoulder bag that you can keep a camera, 1 or 2 lenses, a snack bar, and a few other little accessories. These sling bags can be nice, but you don't want to put too much equipment in them, and that's because they start riding incorrectly, but it's good for a modest amount of gear. You have access to shoot it and carrying it pretty easily. Mixed-use camera bag is really nice because you put camera stuff in the bottom, other stuff in the top, and that's a good mix. You can bring your raincoat, your guidebook with you, and they'll fit in the top half, and you can carry a body, maybe 2 to 4 lenses, depending on the size of the lenses. A fully dedicated backpack is nice when you have lots of gear. It's going to be heavier, and I don't like traveling with mine, but sometimes I really need that gear there, and it's the most comfortable way to carry it. Most people won't need a hard case, but if you're doing a trip down the Colorado River, for instance, and you're on a raft, you might need something that is really hard shell waterproof, and so they can be handy. Most people won't need a full-size roller. That would be more for a professional photographer on a wedding shoot, but if you really had to travel with a lot of equipment and roll it around, that's the easiest way to get around. A few of my favorite bags that I've been using for a few years now is this little Think Tank retrospective. It's just great for just a small little bit of camera equipment to take around. My main camera bag, I think my favorite one is the Lowepro Flipside 400 AW2. It just fits and feels comfortable. It fits a lot of camera gear. I do like the version to the left, the FastPack one, because you can store other stuff besides cameras very easily in there. If I need to bring a lot of stuff, then I bring the larger backpack. But that can get heavy and big, and I prefer not to take it. But it's a good one that I'm happy with. When you get on the plane, of course, what you are trying to do is you're trying to maximize your carry-on, because that's where you get to keep all your valuable stuff. And so that's kind of the big thing, is I need to put all my cameras and all my lenses, my hard drives, my computer, in stuff that I'm carrying on the plane. So I'm going to carry a backpack that's large, and then I'm going to carry another shoulder bag as well, so that I can get as much carried on as possible. They usually have weight limits, although it's rarely enforced, at least in the United States. There are size measurements, but that will vary according to where you are exactly flying. Of course, most airlines regulate it to about 50 pounds, but that does have some variables in there. One of the big things to remember is that you don't want to put valuable gear in your checked luggage. There are just too many things that go on behind your back that you don't have eyes on. There are no batteries, no lithium-ion batteries in your checked luggage. And that's one thing they want you to carry on board, is all your batteries. And so they can stop you, and you may not get on your flight if you put them on. I've had them stop. I have been pulled off the plane because of this thing. It was a mix-up. I didn't actually have batteries in there. There was a confusion. It wasn't my fault. And there are a lot of different restrictions in Europe, and smaller countries do have tighter restrictions than these, so be aware of that. Should you bring a flash or not? Most of the time that I've traveled, I have decided just to deal with natural light. Lighter weight, it's simple, it's authentic, it's the way it is, and that's perfectly fine. There are a few cases where having a little bit of help really will make the difference in a good photograph. And so built-in flashes can work, compact flashes if you need just a little kicker. If you know that you're going to be using it more frequently for something that's a little bit further away, the intermediate or professional level flashes are generally not necessary for most people unless you know you're going to be doing something specific where you need it. And where I typically like to have this is when I'm doing people photographs. And I want to let in a little bit more light. We're outside dealing with bright sunlight, their faces in the shadows. These flashes can really help out seeing those faces. If you're using a tripod or you want to get in the photo yourself, you're going to need a way to trigger the camera. There are self-timers, of course, 2 seconds, 10 seconds, and so forth. There are advanced cable releases, which can give you some intervalometer options, which are nice. And of course, a lot of the cameras now have Wi-Fi, although even I, who supposedly is supposed to be the expert on working these things, they are very problematic in hooking up, and they have limited range. So if it's important, like you're going to do the big group shot and you're going to use your new Wi-Fi system, practice that in the room before you get in front of 30 people to try to set that up, because those things can be a little bit complicated. Memory used to be a big deal. Like, how are you going to store all this digital memory? And now the card sizes have gotten so big, the simplest solution for any trip is just take enough memory cards to cover the entire trip. And if you have 2 card slots, that's fantastic. You can back up in the camera. It makes things very, very simple to use. And this is a great secure option, and it's the lightest, simplest way to go. And memory cards are big enough, it's not an arm and a leg to do that now. The next option is to bring a hard drive that you save things to as you're out there. You might need to borrow a computer, or perhaps your hard drive can save things directly. I'm not a big fan of those. They tend to be very expensive for what they are. I think just going with cards is going to be better for most people in most cases. What I do most of the time, because I like to be able to really check my images at the end of the day, I like to give little slideshows for people I'm traveling with or people that have helped me out in some ways. I'll download to the computer, save a copy on the computer, and then I'll save another copy on an external hard drive. And that would mean that I actually have 4 copies. So if anything happens, I'm very well covering my bases. Some people ask about cloud storage, and I love the theory. Upload my photos to the internet and they are totally saved. If I lose everything on the trip, my photos are saved. The reality is that I don't know, maybe I'm just traveling in really interesting places, but upload speeds are really slow a lot of places. And I do not want to spend 4 hours at night waiting for 1,000 raw images to be uploaded on the internet. And so maybe someday this will become a more viable option. I'm sure it will. It depends on where you go. You know, you go to Paris and you stay at a 5-star hotel, yeah, you're probably going to have fantastic Wi-Fi and you can upload your images. You're going to Africa on safari, it's going to be a little bit slower, let me tell you. And so I'm backing up on a hard drive most of the time. So backup system, backing up in camera is a very good option. Downloading to a computer, backing up onto a hard drive. And that's going to give you the most secure options. I tend not to do a lot of work on my computer when I'm traveling because I like to travel, not work on my computer. I will use Lightroom. There's a lot of other options out there. It's popular, it's pretty easy to use, and so I will use that for downloading and organizing my data. I have seen so many people not do this. I can't believe it. Clear off all the data. It's like, well, I didn't know I was going to be taking this many photos. And then you're spending all this time working on your computer or going through your memory card, deleting last year's Christmas photos that you think you can do without because you didn't do that all ahead of time. And so you want to go out there fully expecting you're just going to shoot up a storm and you've got the space for it to go to. Dealing with batteries has also been a problem because if you do not have a battery charge, you will not be taking photos with any of the modern cameras out there. So I've found that you generally want to have 2 to 3 days worth of power when you head out in the morning. Why do you need 3 days of power going out for a single day? It might be a really good day. Be optimistic. And maybe when you get back to the hotel, the outlet burns out in your room and it's no longer working. Or for some reason, you can't get back to your hotel room and something happens and you need 2 days worth of battery power. And so there's a lot of things that can happen. And so you want to have at least 2 batteries with the DSLR, 3 or more for the mirrorless. It just depends on how fast your camera goes through batteries. If you've never left the country that you are in, let me tell you, the plugins are different, okay? This is a fun discovery when you travel on your first trip, but there's a lot of different plugs. You can do an internet search for world plugs, and they will show you what are the common plugs in a particular country. And some countries have 2 or 3, depending on what type of residence you might be in or hotel. And so you want an adapter that can travel and adjust to all these different places. The one that I have found that is the lightest, smallest, and the most versatile is this unusual name. I've never heard of this Kirkland one, but it's able to be pulled apart, used in multiple different ways. I've traveled with it all over, and it does a fantastic job because there hasn't been anything that it has stumped at this point. And as I say, it's lightweight, it's small, and it's pretty darn cheap as well. This is, of course, going to be in the PDF notes, so I'm going to keep moving. Keeping a charge is, of course, important. Most chargers take about 2 to 3 hours, just be aware of that. If you're going to be traveling in a car or a bus and you want to be able to charge from that vehicle, you'll need an inverter so that you can plug it into the cigarette adapter. That'll work around. And I've started bringing power strips because there are so many electronics. I got my computer, my camera, sometimes 2 cameras with 2 different chargers. I have my phone. Maybe some people have their GPS system or something else that they're charging. And if you go to a room, ideally, it would have this sort of power outlet. Oh, this is fantastic. It fits multiple types. It's got USB ports. There's enough for me and my roommate in there. Everybody can plug in. But sometimes this is what I get. And it's an unusual plug that works for a few hours per evening. And you have one thing to plug into. Do you want your phone to work, or do you want your camera to work, or do you want your computer to work? Choose one. And so that's why I bring a power strip with me. And I found this really cool one. And this one I like because it's very clean and condensed. I think having a cord is nice because sometimes it's hard to plug your battery charger in the unusual places that some outlets tend to be. So I can charge in 2 things from the side, and it's got 2 ports. When I have it plugged in with the other adapter, this is what it looks like in an ideal world where everything's nice and clean. Rarely looks like. This is how I clean things up for photos. But this will fit into just about anything and give you nice versatility for it. Of course, there are different voltages that are used around the world, depends on what region you're in. Most battery chargers and devices are worldwide acceptable when it comes to the voltage, but you might want to check if you have an older camera on the back that it handles the 100 to 240 volt. Keeping the camera clean, I'll take some microfiber cleaning cloths, maybe a soft towel. If I'm going to a dusty environment like a desert, I'll bring a soft brush. And I'm not going to bring a whole roll of garbage bags, but I might bring 1 or 2 that I can stuff my entire pack into. Maybe you're going to be on a Zodiac and water's going to be coming over the edges. Just stuffing it in there for 1 or 2 trips in an emergency case can be handy. Keeping the sensor clean is a constant problem in all types of photography. So if you see a photo like this, you've got a really dusty sensor. And so there's a couple different ways of keeping it clean. The rocket blower is a great first step, and that's something that you can just clean off by pressing some air and getting some air to knock off the dust. The Lens Pen Sensor Clean 2 is a new device that I started trying a year or so ago. They said they were using it on the International Space Station. So I said, maybe it's good enough for me. And it's kind of nice because it doesn't take any liquids and you can clean the sensor off. So if there's dust on the sensor in your hotel room or a nice, safe, clean environment, you kind of just sweep everything off into the corners. And it tends to do a very good job, and haven't had any problems damaging the sensor on all the different cameras that I've used it on. Worst comes to worst, you shoot a bunch of photos that have dust on them. You don't have any of these devices. What you can do is you can shoot a photo of a blank white wall or piece of paper and record that in your camera as a dusty image, and then you can use the software from the manufacturers to go in and clone out. Now you do have to use the manufacturer's software to go in and do this. And so it's not something that's real easy to do, but it is an emergency case. So you would shoot a photograph of a white sheet of paper, it would show you all the dust, and that would be recorded, which is what the software is going to reference later. When you go back and apply that fix to your other images, it fixes your other images afterwards in post-production. So you might want to check into those software options for those cameras. A few final thoughts on gear is think about what your mini system is going to be. Fine, you're taking a whole big bag of cameras, but what are you going to take on that evening walk when you want to go lightweight and you're going to hone down on things? And so it can be either a smaller bag or even just a smaller lens, just to lighten the load for you. Let me give you a few favorite photographic travel accessories. I love the dedicated vertical L grips that you can get for specific cameras. But sometimes I travel with multiple cameras. I really only need one generic universal mounting system for the tripods. And so this 3-legged L bracket I found works on multiple different brands of cameras very easily. For when I'm using my tripod, I can bring one adapter that works on multiple products, which I found helpful. I always want to bring this so that I can clean the sensor when I have a safe, clean environment for doing that. I talked about this pen for cleaning the sensor. As I say, it's done a very good job. Sometimes that headlamp comes in handy along with the glasses so that you can get in nice and close and see that you're doing a good job. Some cameras, annoyingly, have a power cord that comes with it. And in order to charge without that, what you can do is you can buy a right angle plug adapter or a duck head plug adapter, and that plugs in and makes your charger a travel charger. Saves weight, simpler, you don't have to bring a big cord with you. Solar charging, for those of you who are going to be far away from electricity. I was working with a friend who had this Adtop solar charger, and he was working with it on the Fuji batteries, and he was just blown away at how well it charged those batteries. Goal Zero makes some really nice stuff. They tend to be higher end, more industrial. So if you're going up to Everest base camp for the next 8 weeks, you might want one of those up there. Power inverter, there's probably a lot of good ones out there, but something like this where you get a couple of plug-ins and a couple of USB ports, because there's a lot of cameras that you can charge off the USB ports, just like our phones. And the things that I try to always have with me is a battery, a memory card, and a cleaning cloth. In fact, I even had a sewn case that I could put all these items in. And they now make one from Think Tank, at least as far as the battery and the memory card. So if you just kind of have one pack, you can throw it in your pocket, you know you have it. You can leave the camera bag at home, bring a nice little cleaning cloth with you. And if you're out shooting, you run out of batteries, memory card has a default problem, you can just stick in a new memory card. So those are things that I always have close by me. All right, some more final tips for gear. Every night I try to get my bag back to its normal position so I can just wake up in the morning, pick up the bag, and it's ready to go. Mentioned this before, I'll say it again, don't put important stuff in your checked baggage. Watch out about leaving gear in hot cars and sunlight. Don't leave your camera bag in the rental car when you're going into the restaurant, sitting there in the sun. It's not safe for several reasons. If you're going into really humid environments, there are silica gel packets that you can get that you can put in your camera bags. And if you're going to be carrying 2 different hard drives, don't carry them in the same location. When I'm on a trip, I got my camera bag, which has my 2 memory cards. I got my laptop bag with my laptop and my hard drive. I actually break one of my previous rules. I put that in my checked baggage. What if my 2 bags with me got stolen in the airport and the only thing that came through was my checked bag? At least I have my photos, and I'm willing to donate that hard drive if it happens to get stolen because I'm backed up in multiple places. And so backing up, different locations. When I lead tours, one of the things I often do is offer people the option for me to go through their camera to see if it's set up right or wrong. And it's amazing the number of problems that people have set up in there. Like, why do you have this set up? I don't even know what that is. Is a request, is something I get from time to time. And so if you're wondering what I'm doing when I'm checking everyone's camera, including my own, because I do dumb stuff too, what am I really looking for to make sure that my camera's ready for the next day's shoot? All right, make sure your sensor is clean for dust. It's a lot easier to deal with that at home before you go out on a big trip. If you want to do it yourself, you can check it by shooting a white piece of paper at f/22, magnify the image, and just look for black spots. If you need to go in there and clean it, get that little lens pen in there and get the blower and clean that stuff off, because it's much easier to do at home than it is on the road. I like to travel in a stealthy manner. I don't need to advertise what I'm doing, and when I'm taking a photo, I turn off the beep. Same thing visually. The AF illuminators really don't do much good for things more than about 5 feet away. So why am I going to annoy the people I'm going to take pictures of? Why am I going to telescope what I'm trying to do with my camera? Turn that off as well. In case something got lost, I'm going to put my name in the camera so it's electronically in there, so it's on the photographs that I shoot. Yeah, people can write over it, but at least I'm giving honest people a chance to help me out if they want to. Of course, setting the date and time for the location that you're going to be at. It's going to help when organizing and reconstructing the events that was going on and what you were doing. White balance is something that I don't really change that much out in the real world. And so a lot of times I'll just start with it at auto because it's a nice, good, simple setting. Same thing with exposure compensation. I don't work with it a lot, but it's best to have it set to 0 as a starting point. A lot of cameras have these special effects modes, and I'm not saying don't use it. It's just probably not where you want to take all your travel photos unknowingly, and so get that sort of stuff turned off. A little bit more subtly, but kind of the same way, there's a lot of picture modes, film simulation modes, and so be aware of where your camera is at. And I typically leave it at standard or normal so that it's very consistent and I can adjust things later if need be. I do change ISO quite a bit, but kind of on a default basis, I like to start it off on the highest quality, and then I'll make that judgment call as to when I want to go to something higher. Many cameras now offer the option of different types of compression for your images. An uncompressed image is going to be very, very large, and there are ways of doing lossless compressed images, and from all the testing I've done, you are sacrificing virtually nothing in image quality. If you're not sure yourself, do your own test, but this is where I set my camera. And finally, of course, shooting RAW. RAW is the original information that comes off the sensor so that you can make the maximum amount of adjustments later on after the fact. It's going to give you the most versatility in changing environments. And so just to recap it all, here it is all on one slide for you. All right, the final gear check. Let's make sure everything's ready. Have you tested everything? Is the flash working? Do the lenses focus properly? All the cameras working properly? Is everything as clean as it can be? Is it got all the smudges off? Everything's ready to go. Get your cards formatted. You don't want last year's Christmas photos taken with you on vacation in the summertime. Nice clean cards so you have the maximum amount of space. Charge your batteries. And obviously, pack that battery charger. That's one of those critical items you probably don't have a backup on. Make sure you know where that is. And while it's been a lot of fun talking about camera gear, I will leave you with a quote here. The next section is just a little brush up on technique. Hopefully you've all taken your basic photography classes, but this is just me kind of a brush up on the way that I make different camera settings for different types of travel photography. And so first off, let's go with some photo mistakes, all right? And so these are mistakes, as I say, I've led a number of tours, and there's mistakes that I see people making, and these are the mistakes that I think some people make when they're out shooting. I think they shoot too quickly, and they're not paying attention to everything around them, and that maybe there's a better place to shoot. Sometimes they're so busy shooting lots of little shots that they miss the really big shots. People who are kind of unorganized with their camera bags and, oh, I can't catch up with the group because they just don't have everything where it should be and they're not able to keep pace with everyone. As I mentioned, fitness-wise, you end up doing a lot of walking in a lot of different types of photography. And so if you're a photographer, you should be a walker because going out for a 5 or 10 mile hike, walk through the city, you're going to encounter a lot of different possibilities for photographs there. So, there are some things that are generally seen as bad technique here, okay? And shooting from a moving vehicle, while walking, or through windows. But I do also realize that there are exceptions to all of these rules. And so if you can avoid doing these things, by all means avoid it. But I've shot through airplane windows because you don't open the window on the airplane. If you've ever seen a bride and groom coming down the aisle, you got to walk with them sometimes. And so sometimes that's the way it has to work. But in general, if you can avoid these things, you're going to get sharper, better photos. So as far as the camera settings that I'm setting, they're not important, but they're also important. And so it kind of depends on the type of photo. So it's good to get these things right. And so these are, what are there, about 9 of them here, 9 of the critical settings that you're going to make on a camera and adjust on them on a regular basis. And so let's look at a couple of different types of photographs and how I would set them up. So scenics kind of fall into that landscape type photo where we want most everything in focus. There's not a lot of subjects moving around, and so this is a good opportunity for using a tripod if you want great depth of field or you're working under low light conditions. And so I'll give you some kind of primary and secondary settings that I would be in here. In that situation, I would prefer to be in manual. Aperture priority is not a bad semi-automatic way of dealing with it.